Hi everyone, my name is Katie Walsh and I'll be starting off our presentation for our replication study. The other members of the group are Stephanie Geringer, Natasha Nosrat, Marina Sanchez, and myself. So I'm just going to pull up a PowerPoint that'll give a lot of information and illustrate a lot. So the name of our study, the title of it, was Maintaining High Levels of Activity Using a Reinforcement Thinning Schedule. So I'm going to start off talking about what the purpose of this study was. So essentially the purpose was to determine if a reinforcement thinning schedule could be successful in increasing steps in sedentary adults and also maintaining those higher steps and those higher activity levels. We're going to go into more detail about the study, but just to kind of give you an overview, after the baseline session, the reinforcement began on a fixed interval schedule. After that schedule, it was then systematically thinned to two different, the main group is split up into two separate groups, a monitoring only and a monitoring plus reinforcement. And what both of those groups did was thin the reinforcement schedule. So the study just wanted to see if taking the reinforcement and then thinning it helps to increase at the beginning, and then the thinning helps to maintain those higher levels that we hopefully found. So while looking for our article, we came across a good amount of studies similar to this. These are four that we kind of stood out to us. A lot of them showed, two of them in here showed that the maintenance was not held after the reinforcement was pulled. The first one you see here showed a substantial increase, and then it also showed that that increase was maintained, which for a lot that we found, that was kind of an unusual conclusion and unusual results. And we'll get into more of our own study and what was found with ours later on. All of these studies were done with typical populations of adults with both sedentary activity and also maybe starting off with higher level of activity. And then the bottom study there, this one showed what physical activity to increasing the physical activity to at least 10,000 steps a day. It kind of showed what it did for the participants. It improved their physical state and their mood. So this study kind of shows a little bit about the social validity of really doing a study like this and kind of trying to get healthier and increasing exercise. So now we're going to get into more details about the study itself and our replication of the study. We're going to talk about the participants, the materials, the behavior definition, the data collection, the design of the study, both our baseline and our treatment phase, and get into how we did IOA and treatment fidelity. So we're going to start off with Natasha talking about the participants.
Okay, so when replicating our chosen study, the participants that were used were us, which were 4 females, ages 24, 25, 31, and 32. And each one of us had moderate activity in our life. Our lifestyles consisted of moderate activity, but some females in our group exercised during the week. And in order for the participants to proceed with the study, the participants' steps were under 6,000 during baseline in our original study. And when we looked at our own baseline, our steps were within this range as well. For materials needed for replicating the study, these included a pedometer, a spreadsheet to log our data, and a phone to stay in contact with the research assistant, specifically through emailing and the Google Hangouts app. So we were able to be in constant communication through that. And since each individual in our group does not own a pedometer, we use the health application on our personal iPhones to track our daily steps. And this was nice because we didn't have to have the app open. Our steps were just automatically tracked through movement. And for our behavior definition, we chose that physical activity is defined as any instance where an individual is engaging in movement in an upright position, including walking, running, cycling, jogging, and jumping, and so forth. And non-examples of this included movement while laying down and sitting. So for calculated data, our steps for every participant was recorded before midnight on the given spreadsheet every day. And Katie will pull up the spreadsheet that we used. Okay, so here is the spreadsheet we used and recorded our steps before midnight every night. The phones that we had were kept on us throughout the day for all activities except for bathing and sleeping. And as stated before, the health application on our phones tracked our daily activity. And these were recorded on this spreadsheet available to all group members. So since we had access to this on our phones as well, we were able to see that each participant recorded their daily steps before midnight every night. So when we posted it, we were able to see the other steps as well. And then we would also have a screenshot of the steps they took at that hour as well, just to make sure that everything was the same. So all members alternated and fulfilled the position of a research assistant, and each member followed the reinforcement system that included randomized reinforcers such as gift cards and praise slips, and these were randomly selected by the research assistants for that week, and they were numbered. And using a number generator system, the participants were able to draw a random reinforcer from the reinforcement pool. And so this is the reinforcement that we use. So any number we chose, we would get the reinforcement with the corresponding number right here. So the drawings included 50 slips of paper. 50% of these were winning slips. 21 were small prizes, and 3 were larger prizes as well, and 1 was a large prize. And the other 25 were praise phrases such as awesome job, good job, and so forth. For the first 2 weeks of our data collection, Katie and myself were the research assistants, and we were able to apply the reinforcement schedule to each other and the other members that we chose and created ourselves. For the last 2 weeks, Stephanie and Marina were the research assistants, and they applied the reinforcement schedule that they had chosen as well as the reinforcement they created for us. So in terms of the design that we used for our study, we used an alternating treatment design. And this design was seen to be most effective for us because since more than 2 treatments were used for the study, we were able to see which one was more effective. And the participants that were randomly assigned to each group, such as the monitoring only phase and the monitoring plus reinforcement phase. So Stephanie will now explain the baseline and treatment phases.
All right, so for our baseline, the original study took place over 24 weeks, so we obviously had to shorten it. So our baseline took place from June 6th through June 10th. During this time, all participants kept their phone on them, except for they were bathing or sleeping, of course. And at the end, in order to move forward, the participants' steps needed to be less than 6,000, which we all were when we went back and looked at our data. So we were able to proceed with the next phase. For the first treatment phase, it began on the 11th of June and continued through the 17th. Again, we kept our phones on us, but this time we started meeting with the research assistant 3 times a week. These meetings lasted roughly 15 minutes, where we went over the reinforcements they've earned by the participants, which were only given if the participants reached steps greater than 10,000. After this phase, we moved on to the monitoring only condition, or the monitoring plus reinforcement thinning condition. As explained, we were already predetermined who would be in what phase. So Natasha and Marina were in the monitoring only condition, which means they were not reinforced for reaching 10,000 steps. And this phase went on from June 18th through June 24th. Again, everybody kept all their phones on them to continue tracking their steps. And the goals were to reach over 10,000 steps daily. The others, myself and Katie, were part of the monitoring plus reinforcement. And so we were still given reinforcements for both attending a meeting and if we hit 10,000 steps per day. And now we will move on to the IOA.
So for inter-observer agreement, we decided that at the end of the day, every Tuesday and Thursday of the week, participants would send a screenshot of the steps they had taken on that day before midnight. Every other participant would receive the screenshot on the Google Hangout application and then compare it to what we all recorded on the spreadsheet. So basically, if we pull up our spreadsheet, we can see how we tracked the IOA. We just basically listed on every Tuesday and Thursday whether the screenshot was sent from each participant, and then and on the days that is listed as NA, means it wasn't a Tuesday or a Thursday. So we can see from this that our IOA was calculated at 100%. The screenshots were always sent, and when we compared the steps on the screenshot to the steps that each participant inputted on the spreadsheet, they were all always the same. So again, we concluded we came up with 100% IOA. As far as treatment fidelity, we also decided to do something similar to the IOA procedures. The research assistant would randomly send a message on the Google Hangout app requesting for a random screenshot of whatever steps we had taken so far. So right here, we can also see the spreadsheet where we logged all these random checks. There were a total of 18 opportunities where we could send a random check, which was, decided by the research participant. There were 2 occasions in which myself forgot to send the random check because, so out of the 18 opportunities, 16 were a yes. So that gave us an 89% accuracy of implementing the treatment with fidelity. So moving on to the results of the study. Before I forget, also, we each signed a contract which stated everything we would be doing as a participant and as a research assistant within the study. We all signed the contract, so we all knew exactly and were aware of everything we had to fulfill as part of the project. Yes, so everybody signed it. Everybody was aware of everything, all the rules we were to follow on the guidelines. So moving on to the results of our study, we concluded that once you can see the graph, you can see that, so the monitoring only group is displayed on the no-fail markers, and then the monitoring plus reinforcement group is displayed on the failed markers. Since it's not coming up, I will show you over here on my hard copy. We can see that there was a slight increase from baseline to the intervention phases for both of the groups. During both of the fixed interval and the randomization phases, the monitoring only group had higher steps on average, as well as during follow-up, which was only conducted for 1 day. But the follow-up phase was a little bit higher than the baseline. For monitoring only, the averages were higher during the fixed interval phase. And then for monitoring plus reinforcement, the averages were higher during the randomization phase. So that was a little bit interesting to see. Basically that the monitoring only group got higher averages of steps, even though they had a thinner reinforcement schedule when we were doing the randomization phase. So overall, the monitoring only had higher averages. On a couple of days, some of the participants did exceed the desired 10,000 steps. However, it wasn't very consistent. So due to our personal limitations and the project limitations, which we will talk about later on. So yeah, basically those are the results. We did see, again, some increase, slight increase, not exactly what we would have liked, especially due to time constraints and just other limitations that we had, but there was a bit of an increase. And now we will begin to talk about our personal graphs, and I believe Natasha will talk about hers first.
Okay, so here's my graph. As you could see, my baseline was fairly stable, but for the fixed interval phase and monitoring only phase, it was not stable at all. I had days that I exercised where you could see the points are higher. I reached higher steps, but it wasn't what I wanted. As my result, I was pushing for more steps, but it was really difficult for me due to some limitations. But as you can see, for the follow-up phase that we did, that was when I reached my highest average in range of 6,752 steps. And I felt like this was more because I became more aware of my daily steps and wanted to increase my activities. So I decided to walk around more, engage in more exercise and whatnot. But I would say that my personal limitations would be that one of the main reasons was due to schoolwork. So I felt like after work, if I'm pretty sedentary at work and I come home and I would do work for this project or other courses, I would be sitting down for more than 3 hours. And those were the days where my steps were very low and sometimes even under 3,000 steps. So now Katie will discuss her graph and her data collection for this study.
So in looking at my graph, the first thing you probably notice is the baseline isn't very stable. For me, I really felt like this was due to the time constraints. We took a 24-week study and kind of condensed it down to, I think it was like 3 weeks. So in an ideal situation, we would have preferred to probably extend the baseline a little bit further to see some more stable data. It just didn't really seem possible based on the time. In my fixed interval plus monitoring, my average did go up and my range did go up. So there was a little bit of an increase. I'd prefer to see a little more of a consistent upward trend than what is there, but it's something, I suppose. And then in the monitoring, I was in the monitoring plus reinforcement group. So there I have my highest average and my highest range. Personally, I think that's attributed to just being, I was more aware because I was a little more in the groove and used to having my phone on me and just kind of, you know, I was just used to that and paying attention to how much I was walking during the day. So I can say, personally, I think for me, a big limitation was that I exercise maybe 2 or 3 times a week, which not that that should take away from trying to hit 10,000 steps on a day when I'm not exercising, but it definitely did kind of, I think, kind of skew my data and the way that it looks on the graph, because those really high points were days where I was either walking a lot more because I was outside or exercising. But we'll get into more on the limitations. But for me personally, I felt that that was probably one of the bigger limitations. So next up, we're going to have Marina talk about her graph.
So my graph was pretty stable at baseline. Once we reached the fixed interval phase, I did reach the 10,000 steps or higher on 2 occasions. And that was basically due to I play soccer on Friday nights. So the days that I was at soccer were the days that I logged in more steps. So that definitely also skewed my data on my end, because typically, like Natasha mentioned, you know, we have work, we have school, we have, you know, chores at home, and just all life getting in the way of working out. So making time to work out was really hard. When we have like a set schedule already of working out, like my soccer games, it kind of just happens. So I feel like the days that I did have soccer and that I logged in more than 10,000 steps, that really skewed my data. But I did see a higher increase after baseline. I think, like Natasha was saying, we were just more aware of it. I'm personally very, I like a challenge. So I wanted to beat the other girls and I wanted to get higher steps. So I really did try. But again, just life getting in the way of everything was not helpful at all. So yeah, let's move on to Stephanie's graph.
All right, so obviously you can see I never hit 10,000. My baseline was a little unstable. There was a weird one day where it shot up. However, my average for the monitoring phase was higher than the baseline. So it showed that the fixed interval plus the monitoring phase did show an improvement in the amount of steps that I took. And then when I moved to the monitoring plus reinforcement, it did dip down a little bit. It did, but you can start seeing an upward trend. Some of the limitations that occurred were my kids definitely hit summer vacation. So I wasn't walking them to school anymore. We're kind of like home, and temperatures soared to 118. So we stayed inside a lot. So I wasn't even going shopping with them. We were kind of staying home a lot more, which we still are. So there's definite factors as to why my steps maintain to be lower. And I will further explain some of the project limitations that we all experience. So for the project itself, we all talked about it, and the reinforcement used in the original study, we obviously weren't going to access an iPad or a trip to Disney or any of the gift cards. So that reinforcement wasn't there for us. While we did love hearing from each other, great job, keep going, it's an awesome, you're doing awesome. All of those are nice, but we had no tangible reinforcers like the participants in the original study did. And like we all kind of mentioned, that the amount of time it took that we had definitely inhibits your ability to work your way up to the 10,000. And meeting in person, while we were able to talk on Google Hangouts and see each other, it's not the same as being face-to-face with somebody as part of your reinforcement or in a meeting with them. And the personal limitations differed for us all, but I mentioned weather, and there was using a phone versus a Fitbit. Keeping a phone on you can be a little cumbersome when you're trying to do something that requires two hands and you don't have pockets or whatever the deal may be. Some members definitely saw an increase in their data that on days that they were already exercising or playing soccer or made a trip to the gym versus days with no exercise. So it definitely made the data a little different, skewed for them. And then lastly, we all felt the time restraints. We all had classwork or children or work requirements that we have to accomplish before trying to get these steps in. Some of us were traveling and sitting in a car for the day. So that definitely was personal limitations for us. And now Katie's going to conclude us.
So I'm going to first talk about what the conclusions of the original study were. So the original study said the reinforcement thinning schedule has the potential to maintain higher levels. So when I first read that sentence, I was a little bit confused, but as you looked further, they explained it, and it did make more sense as you looked at the results and the data that was accumulated. So during the first reinforcement phase, which was the fixed interval, they did see increased steps across the board for all of the participants. However, as you got into the next phase, when there was the monitoring only, where they weren't necessarily reinforced for the steps, the increase wasn't there as much. And then when the study was done, when they did the follow-up phase where the reinforcement was pulled 100%, the higher levels didn't maintain at all. So the problem was that even though the reinforcement was thinned, once it was removed completely, the maintenance just wasn't there. So what the study did show was that there was evidence that the higher levels of steps could be maintained if maybe the thinning of the schedule, of the reinforcement schedule, had happened a little bit slower. And maybe they'd extended the reinforcement schedule a little bit longer before pulling the reinforcement completely. So then the conclusions of our study. So we followed a schedule similar to the original study. We just condensed our phases, obviously. For us, what we found was the quote-unquote fake reinforcers. Again, the praise and the verbal reinforcers were there, but because we didn't have access to those gift cards and those other things, the motivation it really just wasn't as high. So for us, that was one of the biggest conclusions that we came across. We did, as you saw our personal graphs, for some participants, there was a slight increase going from baseline into the intervention phase, and that's in both phases of the intervention phase, both the original reinforcement and as we started to thin. So there was a slight increase, but without that motivation, it kind of really put a damper on what we saw from our data. We feel that given a little more time for the study, we feel that we could have had more of an increase. We all feel that we're a little more aware of our steps. I know for me, I'm still paying attention. So, maybe even if our follow-up study, we've been able to take a little bit more data, we feel that we still could have seen, if not an increase, at least somewhat of a maintenance of the higher levels that we come across. So we have here the group log. Real quick, I would say that we were in constant communication between our weekly meetings and then extra meetings we had in there for the reinforcement meetings, and also just the chat on Google Hangout. We were constantly asking questions, collaborating, talking to each other, while still being, aware and sensitive to everyone's crazy schedules that we had this summer. So this is just a brief kind of outline here of our group log. And then these are our references. So thank you everyone for watching. We hope you found it interesting. And we look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts. Thanks.